In the forgotten northern quarter of Vienna, down an alley untouched by GPS signals or digital memory, stood an unmarked, dust-colored building. No doorbell, no signage, just a blackened brass handle on a warped oak door, slightly warm to the touch regardless of the season. Dr. Elias Marek had not meant to find it. Theoretical physicist by trade, philosopher by obsession, he had followed a centuries-old footnote in a rare Latin manuscript to an address that technically no longer existed. And yet, here he stood, notebook in hand, heart strangely calm. Inside, the silence was not silence at all. It breathed. The air moved with the texture of thoughts, dense and fine as powdered glass. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves curved in impossible geometries, vanishing into a vanishing point that didn't obey three-dimensional logic. There were no light bulbs. Instead, long strands of luminous script floated mid-air, casting a soft golden glow. The writing resembled no known alphabet, yet Elias could somehow interpret fragments. Phrases like conceptual matter stabilizer and chrono-ethical paradox. And then he saw it, the staircase. It spiraled upwards, not merely in space, but through it. Each step shimmered as if woven from reflections, and Elias noticed that the farther one ascended, the less human their shadow appeared. A woman stood at the base. She wore a coat of indigo leather stitched with constellations. Her eyes, the color of mercury, didn't blink. "You read the index," she said. Elias nodded. "Then you may climb. But remember, every answer here comes at the cost of a question you'll never be able to ask again." He took the first step. The world flickered, and the library began to read him. Each step Elias took up the whispering staircase folded reality like origami. The world below dimmed into abstraction, his memories, his past, his self, all unraveling like code being rewritten by something older than logic. As he reached the third landing, he was greeted not by doors, but by a corridor of translucent panels, each holding a scene frozen in time. Not memories, possibilities. Some bore his face, but in roles he had never played. Elias as a poet, a traitor, a monk in a Mars-bound monastery. When he touched one, it rippled and sang in a voice that belonged to no species he knew. Every life unlived still casts a shadow on the paths you walk. At the corridor's end stood a chamber with walls made of petrified language. Glyphs danced slowly across the surfaces, shifting in and out of known syntax, Aramaic turning to binary, hieroglyphs morphing into music notes. And there, seated on an invisible chair above an invisible floor, floated a being. Not a person, not quite. It resembled a loosely woven sculpture of thought itself. Streams of ideas, fragments of poems, scientific equations, and childhood riddles flowing like neural plasma. It turned to Elias with a face that kept changing, sometimes his father's, sometimes Einstein's, sometimes something he couldn't even process. "I am the archivist of unspoken thoughts," it intoned without sound. Elias tried to speak. He had questions, so many, but no words left his mouth. Instead, the archivist read the tremors in his silence. "You seek knowledge without form, concepts not yet born. Understand this, ideas have gravity. The more profound, the more dangerous. You may study them, but they will study you back." Suddenly, shelves began to emerge from the chamber's air, floating slowly like icebergs. Each contained a glowing cube of pulsating light, raw ideas, undigested by time. Elias reached for one. It was labeled "The Theory of Quiet Catastrophes," events that reshape reality without being noticed. As his fingers brushed the surface, his skin tingled with electricity. He saw visions, alternate Earths, histories where Beethoven never existed, where fire was never discovered, where silence itself had become weaponized. And then the archivist spoke again. "You may absorb one, but only one. Doing so will erase the memory of a question you've asked since childhood. Choose carefully. Elias hesitated. A humming sound filled the room. The cubes began to dim one by one. Time was folding again. He felt the pressure of existence narrowing to a point. Finally, he chose. And everything he had ever wondered about the stars as a boy vanished from his mind like breath on glass. Elias staggered back as the cube dissolved into his palm, fusing with the skin like ink soaking into ancient paper. His body remained the same, but his mind was rearranged, slightly, subtly, like a painting rehung just a few centimeters off-center. He no longer remembered what the stars had once meant to him. The archivist watched with stillness that seemed compassionate, or perhaps clinical. "Now," it said, "you are marked. The library will adjust." And adjust it did. The room blurred, edges softening as if boundaries were being negotiated anew. A door appeared, not built, but agreed upon by the architecture of the library itself. It was locked, with no handle, only a riddle inscribed across it in living ink. What is the one truth that can never be spoken, only lived? Elias didn't answer. He simply breathed. The door opened. Beyond it lay the paradox vault, a hollowed sphere suspended in a dark nothingness. No walls, no floor, only endless shelves curved around a single floating pedestal, upon which rested a single book, bound in his own skin. Not metaphorically, literally. The title, etched in a language he had never learned but immediately understood, read, "The Future Recollections of Dr. Elias Marek." Hands trembling, he opened the first page. It was a transcript of a lecture he had not yet given, dated February 17, 2231, delivered in the University of Europa, beneath the icy oceans of Jupiter's moon. In it, he detailed his theory of recursive time tension, a state in which past and future events compress each other to the breaking point, threatening to collapse all conscious time into a single eternal moment. Impossible. He flipped further. There were conversations he had not yet had, with people who didn't yet exist. A map of a city shaped like a Mobius strip. A formula that solved the Fermi paradox, but implied something deeply disturbing. We are not alone, because we are not real enough yet to be perceived. Elias backed away. His thoughts were unraveling again. Behind him, another voice, but this time, human. "You shouldn't have opened that book." A man stood at the edge of the vault. Or not quite a man. He was Elias. Older, weathered, wearing a coat stitched with starlight and a mechanical eye that ticked softly with each blink. "You're not ready," said future Elias. "Then why am I here?" Elias whispered. Future Elias stepped closer, removing a small device from his coat, a crystal ring suspended in a gyroscopic orbit. Because readiness is a myth, the mind tells itself to delay revolution. Listen carefully. I came to warn you. The library isn't a place, it's a test. And you're not the first version of you to fail. The vault groaned. Shelves shimmered. The book in Elias's hands grew heavier. "But this time," said the future self, placing the device in Elias's palm, "you might survive the answer." With that, future Elias began to flicker, phasing out of the timeline, sentence by sentence. As he vanished, his final words echoed like a truth collapsing in on itself. "Find the echo codex before it finds you." The device left by future Elias hovered just above Elias's palm, spinning softly. It cast no light, yet everything it touched became clearer, sharper, almost too real. Time now seemed heavy, like water around his limbs. The vault behind him began to distort, erasing the path he had taken. He understood there was no going back. He whispered to the library. He wasn't sure why, but it felt right. "Take me to the echo wing." The moment he spoke, the world inverted. There was no motion, no corridor, no footsteps, just arrival. Elias stood at the threshold of a vast hall that seemed to stretch forever in every direction, filled not with books but with voices. Thousands of whispers, each overlapping like waves. They didn't speak in language, but in memory. The sound of a grandmother's laugh, the weight of unspoken regrets, the crackle of civilizations that never rose. This was the echo wing, where futures that never came to be lingered, begging for coherence. Ideas that had been almost real, dreams abandoned too soon, timelines overwritten before birth. And in the center, impassive and luminous, stood a desk made of translucent bone. Behind it sat the librarian. She did not rise, she did not need to. Her presence filled the chamber like gravity. She looked human, but with details that betrayed deeper design. Her eyes were like twin event horizons. Her hair flickered with historical artifacts, a feather from a dodo, a strand of fiber optic cable, a torn page from an unpublished Kafka story. But Elias froze, not because of what she was, because he recognized her. "Anya?" he whispered. She tilted her head. "That is one of the names I've worn, yes." He took a step forward. "We were together. I remember us, on a train to Zurich. You were reading Pessoa. You're remembering a memory that no longer belongs to your timeline," she said gently. "You're remembering a version of me that died with the fifth edit of your reality." Elias's breath caught. "I was sent here to forget you," he said. "No," she corrected him. "You were sent here because you couldn't." From a drawer that didn't exist until she opened it, she withdrew a page, aged and torn. She slid it across the desk. It was a letter, in his own handwriting. "To the version of me that chooses to remember love more than truth." Elias read on, heart thundering. It was a message from himself, written in a future he hadn't yet lived, but somehow already mourned. It described the Echo Codex, a living document that rewrote timelines according to what people felt should have happened, not what did. A kind of collective nostalgia weaponized into cosmic code. And it warned him someone was already using it. "Who?" Elias asked. The librarian stood now for the first time. The entity known as the curator. He seeks to overwrite consensus reality with one of his choosing, a world of static meaning, without paradox, without choice. Where is he? She raised her hand. Behind her, a rift opened, a spiral of fractured glass, behind which moved a black library, rotting and infinite. He's in the shadow index. That's where the codex is. But beware, the moment you enter, your identity becomes negotiable. Who you are becomes a function of what you dare to question. Elias stepped toward the rift. He didn't feel brave. He felt necessary. Crossing into the shadow index felt like being rewritten mid-sentence. There was no transition, only replacement. The warm silence of the echo wing vanished, and in its place came a dense, sentient quiet, like walking into a room where every object had just stopped whispering. Here, books did not rest on shelves. They hovered, chained to the air by logic loops and recursive paradoxes. Pages turned themselves. Ink bled upward. Words were not printed but carved, deeply, permanently, as if reality itself needed reminders not to forget. Elias felt his own name pulling at the edge of his consciousness. The moment he stepped forward, a soft tolling echoed in the dark. Not sound, but recognition. Something within the library had noticed him. A section of the index lit up with dim blue fire, a signal, a warning, an invitation. But before he could follow it, someone spoke. "Hold still, or the index will bind you as a reference." Elias turned. A figure stood in the shadows, a tall, thin man cloaked in layers of worn parchment, blindfolded with a strip of vellum. On his chest hung a chain bearing an ancient catalog card. Subject, origin, librarian status, lost, found again. "You're the first librarian," Elias said, the words forming before he could question them. "I was," the monk replied, "and then I became a footnote. Now I'm a contradiction, which suits me fine." The man extended his hand. His fingers were ink-stained and scarred by time. "I kept watch over the codex before it learned to hide. It has since grown cunning. It listens. It adapts. And now it belongs to the curator." "The curator," Elias repeated, feeling the name resist being spoken. "Yes, a former librarian like me, once tasked with preserving possibility. But he became addicted to coherence, to erasing ambiguity. He believes the universe should be clean, tidy, structured, certain." The monk leaned closer. "But reality is not a library. It is a debate." Elias nodded. "I need to find the Echo Codex before he rewrites everything." The monk smiled faintly. "Then you must enter the redacted aisle, the place where erased truths go to rot." He produced the single page torn from the codex itself. When Elias touched it, the page whispered in 100 voices, "Every story untold is a weapon in the wrong hands." The ink on the page shifted, forming a map, an impossible changing corridor of thoughts and timelines, bending back upon themselves. But before Elias could move, the monk grabbed his arm. "Understand this. When you see the codex, it will show you the version of the world you most desperately wish to be true. You will be tempted to accept it, to preserve it." "And if I do?" Elias asked. "Then the real world dies, quietly, as it always does." The monk stepped back, merging again into the shelves of the index, becoming unreadable once more. Elias took a breath and stepped toward the redacted aisle. The corridor inhaled him. The redacted aisle was not a corridor, not exactly. It was more like a living hypothesis, a thought experiment the library had buried beneath layers of the Nile. It smelled faintly of scorched paper and ash, as though every truth here had once been set on fire, and then extinguished just before disappearing completely. Elias stepped forward, and with each pace he passed what looked like translucent windows into realities that never were. To his left, a world where electricity had never been discovered, civilizations navigating by firelight, whispering to water and stone. To his right, a reality where war had been abolished, at the cost of language itself. People there communicated through complex harmonics of breath and silence, their dreams regulated to preserve peace. As he walked, he saw himself, again and again. Each version wore different scars, carried different regrets. In one, he had chosen love over discovery and lived a long, quiet life by the sea. In another, he was a criminal, hunted for uncovering truths that governments had buried. And in one, he was still with Anya. That window stopped him cold. There they were, laughing in a sunlit apartment full of books and unfinished letters. She wore the same expression he remembered from Zurich, but softer, unburdened. He watched as that Elias kissed her forehead and returned to an old piano, playing a melody he didn't recognize, but felt he'd known forever. Tears welled in his eyes. The codex was testing him. A whisper curled around his ears, smooth and poisonous. You could have this. One page rewritten. One world restored. Just turn back. He stood frozen. It was then the Echo Codex revealed itself, not with light, but with gravity. The floor beneath him buckled, not physically, but conceptually. And Elias fell inward, downward, into a spiral of meaning. He landed, not on stone, but on a vast page. The codex was alive. It pulsed beneath him like a massive, dreaming creature. Words bloomed across its surface in recursive spirals. Some glowed gently, others burned. He tried to read one line and instantly forgot his mother's voice. Another, and he forgot what it meant to be cold. He understood. To read from the codex was to rewrite the reader. Suddenly, his mind shivered. A voice echoed, smooth as glass over ice. At last. A figure emerged, slowly forming from the unwritten spaces between paragraphs. The curator. He wore no face. Instead, his head was wrapped in redacted text, censor marks swirling like tattoos. His robe was composed of old theories, dismissed ideas, and the syntax of propaganda. "You seek to stop me," he said. "Yet you are here because the world you come from is broken. Admit it. You do not want truth. You want coherence." Elias stood firm. Truth without paradox isn't truth. It's fiction with a confident narrator. The curator laughed. The sound was clean, surgical. Paradox is waste. Ambiguity is rot. I will use the codex to restore clarity. No more forgotten dreams. No more abandoned timelines. One reality. One final edit. "And what about freedom?" asked. The codex pulsed beneath them. A shiver of timelines vibrated through the room. "Freedom is inefficient," the curator hissed. With that, he raised his hand. From the codex, dark tendrils erupted, twisting fragments of erased realities, binding themselves into weapons. Elias backed away as the world began to fracture. But then he remembered the device future Elias had given him, the spinning gyroscopic ring. He raised it. It began to glow with impossible light. The codex paused. The curator faltered. The ring spoke. "Initiate final fork? Confirm." Elias stared at it. This wasn't a tool. It was a choice engine. One press, and he could split the codex. Save one truth, bury another. But which? The choice engine vibrated in Elias's hand, humming with dimensional tension. Every possible outcome folded inside it like a kaleidoscope of futures, ready to collapse into one final decision. All around him, the echo codex trembled, sensing that it too might soon be rewritten. The curator hovered above the codex like a judge over a courtroom of ghosts. "Press the ring," he said, "and you may win, Elias. But the cost will be a reality you'll never again question." Elias's mind reeled. He could feel the ring trying to decide for him based on who he had been. It analyzed regrets, filtered desires, prioritized timelines. But he wasn't a collection of calculations. He was still human. That had to matter. "What happens if I do nothing?" Elias asked. The curator's tone turned cold. "Entropy will decide for you." And then the library opened. Not a door, not a passage. It opened itself. As if reality gave way to an idea too old to be contained. Elias was pulled, not physically, but philosophically, into the infinite atrium. A great dome of thought, memory, and meaning. Every idea ever conceived echoed in its vast chamber. Floating islands spun through the air. Plato's cave projected in fire. Gödel's incompleteness spiraling like a constellation. Forgotten lullabies colliding with quantum principles. And seated in a great circle of transparent thrones were voices. Personifications of concepts. freedom, fear, memory, sacrifice, curiosity. Each wore the face of a different version of Elias, one young, one old, one genderless, one shattered. You are not one man, they said in harmony. You are the vote of many. In the center of the dome, suspended in light, the echo codex began to unfurl. A vote was called, not in words, but in resonance. The versions of Elias began to cast their truths. Curiosity. Let ambiguity live. Let the library stay wild. Fear. Choose the safe edit. Let one reality stabilize. Memory. Preserve what was, even if it hurts. Sacrifice. Burn it all. Start over. Only one version remained silent. A chair near the center, empty until now. Love. The librarian, Anya, stepped forward and sat in that chair. She looked at Elias, and for a moment all of time trembled. You've seen me in echoes, in absences, but I was real. You loved me, and I loved you. Tears welled in his eyes. Then why can't I remember your voice? She smiled. Because to change the world, you had to forget what made it bearable. And then she stood. But now, choose, Elias, not as a fragment, not as a theory, as yourself. The ring in his palm whispered again, initiate final fork? Confirm? He looked at the codex, at the curator, at the versions of himself still voting, still dreaming. And then he whispered one word. No. He dropped the ring. It shattered, not violently, but peacefully. The codex stopped pulsing. Reality paused. The curator screamed, not in pain, but in disbelief. You broke the choice engine! You broke the choice! No, Elias said softly. I rewrote the question. Epilogue. The library rewrites itself. Time bent. Realities reintegrated. The codex closed, not locked, but quiet. The library whispered once more, alive again with uncertainty, paradox, and freedom. Elias woke on a park bench in Vienna, snow falling, a warm book in his lap, its cover blank. No one noticed him, except one woman passing with a warm scarf and a distant smile. She looked familiar. Anya? She paused. I don't know you, she said. Then a pause. But maybe we've met in another draft. She walked on. Elias opened the book. It was empty, waiting to be written. And this time he would write it by living it. The end.